Well, good morning, and thank you for the invitation again to be here. I am Pastor Bucky Beach, for those of you who do not know me. On weekends, I tend to listen to the radio a lot, NPR, and one of the shows that I've grown to appreciate is on our local station. It's called Hidden Brain by Shankar Vedantam. And a few weeks ago, in the episode called The Enemies of Gratitude, the show started with Shankar saying this: if you make at least $30,000 a year, congratulations. Your income is 10 times the global median and in the top 5% of incomes worldwide. If you are older than 35, congratulations. For much of human history, many people died before they were 30. If you have a job and a stable income, live in a democratic country, and have a college degree, you are in a rarefied group in the history of humankind. If you enjoy good health, good friends, nice vacations, you really ought to get down on your knees and thank Providence. So, are you on your knees yet? That's how he ended that little vignette. So here's another perspective. The National Day of Mourning, first held in 1970, is an annual demonstration held on the fourth Thursday in November that aims to educate the public about Native Americans in the United States, notably the Wampanoag and other tribes of the eastern United States, to dispel myths surrounding the Thanksgiving story and raise awareness toward historical and ongoing struggles facing Native American tribes. So that's happening at the same time that we celebrate Thanksgiving. And we know that Thanksgiving is about more than just overeating and being on a tryptophan high. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. And I'm glad to see that you are here and recovered, or at least recovering, as I am myself. So regarding Thanksgiving, the first thing that I now think about in my ripe old age is Native American history, how far we have come and how far we have to go to learn about what really happened and what has happened since and what has happened because of it. But long ago, in my 20s, I was introduced to American historian and artist and folklorist Eric Sloan, who wrote wonderful books and drew wonderful pictures about tools and barns, writing with a reverence for the American past. So this is one of his books, and you feel free to take a look at it after the service today. But I discovered one particular book, this one called The Spirits of 76, quite a few years ago now, written for the American Bicentennial of 1976. So that dates me at least. Eric Sloan writes in the foreword to this book, I quote, "It struck me that with the American people preparing to recapture the spirit of 76 and eager to become immersed in a nostalgic recognition of their past, we should become aware of what the American was 200 years ago and what we are now. The more I thought about this hitherto unconsidered aspect of Americana, the more valuable the idea seemed." So he goes on. For some years, I had researched the physical difference between the early American and our present-day counterpart, but I had never thought about any moral or spiritual differences. And it began when I viewed a display of death masks of early presidents and great Americans of the 18th century and was struck with a certain tininess of features and unusually small-sized heads. One of my hobbies had been collecting ancient hats, And although men used to wear their hair full and long, I had never found a hat that would fit my own head. Women's clothing, too, in spite of so many undergarments, was also tiny. The vision of huge whaling men was shattered when I visited the whaling ship at Mystic, Connecticut, and saw the unbelievably small bunks they slept in. Although people were generally smaller, I found that they were wiry and much stronger. Their hearing was more acute and their vision was sharper. Much night work was done without the electric illumination necessary today. And such work as droving and haying and building, even hunting, was done at night and without lights. We must presume their night vision was extraordinary. And so he goes on, and he makes this, I think, very important point. The truth is that 1776 belongs to 1776. We cannot hope to recapture the old ways easily, partly because we have so destroyed our past, but also because we ourselves have become different. And some of the difference he describes in these words: the godly, frugal, content, thankful, work-loving person of yesterday has now become the money-oriented, extravagant, discontented, thankless, work-shunning person of today. Kind of gets right to the point, huh? The original spirits of America past have become worn out, obsolete, and not very adaptable to modern living. Well, his point is not to disparage who we are, but he goes on to say, perhaps some of the vanishing spirits could be rekindled. We so often comment, if we only knew then what we know now, could become, if we only could know now what they knew then. History does a good job of recording what humans do, yet so seldom has it recorded the way humans think. The modern American boasts of having know-how, but the old-timers had something we have lost along the way: the American know-why. Sloan quotes Albert Schweitzer: "People have lost the capacity to foresee and to forestall. We will end by destroying the earth." Well, Sloan goes on to comment, and here I think he and Wendell Berry agree, and I quote, "Actually, nothing is taken from nor added to the earth, and humans simply rearrange, pollute, or waste its resources. So we cannot destroy the earth, although we can destroy it for our own use, and so eventually destroy ourselves. The corporate life may appear prosperous and healthy in spite of the presence of spiritual cancer. Although we tend to believe our existence depends upon science and invention, the real soul of humankind is spirit. He then refers to Thomas Edison, who, when told that he had contributed more to civilization than any other human being, said, and you can read along with me here, "Civilization doesn't really lean on inventions. The most necessary task for civilization is to teach us to think." So Eric Sloan wrote about 10 early American spirits which he believed had either weakened or vanished. And so for today, I chose to reflect on the spirit of giving thanks, or the spirit of thankfulness. Sloan wrote that there are actually very few records of how our first holidays were spent. So we rely more on personal diaries rather than printed history. And that's probably changed in the last number of years, 40 years or so. But one early mention he gives involves the Pennsylvania German custom of gathering harvest foods in a basket beneath a fruit tree, when the farm family would gather outside under that tree for its private Thanksgiving service, and a plate was set out for each member of the family. And then, of course, he drew pictures of what that might have looked like. Modern history would have us believe that from the beginning, the American Thanksgiving was a day of merriment and feasting. But Sloan notes that the pioneer colonists would not have regarded it that way. Actually, he calls it, they would have regarded it as a blasphemy. Occasions that we now celebrate with stuff and stuffing, I guess, were usually solemn in those days, with more fasting than feasting. The first Thanksgiving feasts were the end of Thanksgiving fasts. In the Puritan Code, feasts and fasts kept close company. Until 1800, the day was primarily a church observance and also a time for family reunion. And he notes an early dictionary mentions Thanksgiving as a holy day set aside for religious services, a celebration of divine goodness and mercy. Thanksgiving and fast were mentioned together as late as 1835, when the Connecticut General Assembly repealed a law which prohibits service labor and recreation on days of fast and Thanksgiving, subject to a fine of $4. Pioneer Americans were rich in the spirit of thankfulness. And despite what we or you may now think of this particular story of the Mayflower, when it weighed anchor at Plymouth, the first act of human expression was to gather on deck for prayers. And the first steps ashore were followed by kneeling in the sand for another prayer of thanks. One could say that thankfulness was an important tie to friendship with the American Indians, whose ceremonies were full of thanksgiving. And it was interesting being reacquainted with the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving prayer, and it's very long, and I decided not to bring it and read it this morning, but we used it at some of it at our own Thanksgiving family dinner. And one of the things, and that's what I was talking to Eldon about, is it's prayers of thanksgiving, talking to that which has given its life for you, talking to the birds and the animals and creation, actually talking to and addressing them and giving thanks. A common prayer of Native people includes gratefulness for the land and for all things upon the land which the Spirit has bestowed. And if you've ever been to a powwow, one of our local powwows perhaps, you know that as you stand for the opening prayer, you may be standing for 10 or 15 minutes while somebody speaks in Ojibwa, and you don't know a word of Ojibwa, but you're standing in respect for a long prayer that is actually talking to those things that have given themselves for us. And so it's an interesting reflection to note that as we have buried and set aside many of those early civilizations, we have also buried much of what made them civilized. And that's that spirit of thanksgiving. So we go back to early American Quaker William Penn, who once wrote that greed has been the downfall of individuals and of nations. We constantly expect more than that which we have. We take all that is given us, though never really meant for us, and do this without even acknowledging our act to God. Well, over the last 35 years or so of being a pastor, it has been frustrating to learn that most contemporary prayers that I've heard are requests, whereas old-time prayers were more expressive of thanksgiving. And so in my own experience, it has been an encounter with Buddhism that has helped me learn different ways of praying without requesting anything. And it makes me think back to, and we probably have much of this in common, perhaps you grew up also saying grace before and after each meal. If you were at Harvard in 1650, you would be aware of this rule. Neither may any scholar rise from his place or go out of ye hall at mealtime before Thanksgiving be ended. Now, I would reflect that today that could be considered unconstitutional, but 17th century Harvard regarded it as, I quote, a simple decency inspired by the dignity of man and the general spirit of the college. Well, perhaps we could agree, with Eric Sloan, that a spirit of thankfulness is vanishing, and that thankfulness also need not be solely denominational in orientation, nor need it reference a specific God, to come from the heart. Well, Sloan goes on to add some illustrations, and this is partly what I love about his writing. He takes things like the phrase knocking on wood, and he said it indicated that moment when the early farmer closed the barn for the night, and as the latch was put in place, he expressed thankfulness with a ceremonial knock on the wooden doorframe. One vanished early American holiday was Plow Monday, when farmers began their season of farm work. On the Monday after the 12th day of January, the first farm chore of the year was to attend church. There they gave thanks that last year's bounties had lasted through the winter. On the 1st of August, when the farming season ended, Lammas Day was another early Thanksgiving ceremony. And the head of the household went to church in the morning of that day with a loaf of bread made from the year's first grain, This Lammas loaf was consecrated, and it became the center of a Lammas Day feast at noon, much like our present-day Thanksgiving feast. One story is that the standard American Thanksgiving Day originated in 1630 during one of the coldest days in February, when food stores had run low and supplies from England had failed to arrive. Can't read my own writing here. A meeting was held to declare a time of fasting and prayer. But on that same day, a ship appeared on the occasion, and the occasion changed from a fast to a feast. One could reflect that over time we really copied an American Indian menu of corn, turkey, and pumpkin squash and haven't gone far from it since. February of 1630, the date of our first National Thanksgiving Day, has changed several times. Only 2 years later, in 1632, it was proclaimed as a public, spelled P-U-B-L-I-Q-U-E, a public Thanksgiving Day throughout the several plantations, to be observed on June 13th. In 1788, the date was changed by Congress to December 30th, but then again in 1789, George Washington changed it to November 26th. In 1863, President Lincoln decided it should be the last Thursday in November, which remained that way until merchants said it was too close to Christmas. So FDR agreed and changed that it would be the Thursday before to balance our holidays better. And since then, bargain sales and overeating in the name of Thanksgiving are now established Americana for that date. And now that date includes, that festival or holiday includes what has sadly become probably the most important day to be celebrated in modern history, Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Which brings me to Henry David Thoreau. And you can take this first passage, this first statement, a number of ways. Thoreau said, to change society, one must change the individual. You can see that positively, you can see it negatively. But then I think you get my point with Flannery O'Connor. You have to push as hard as the age that pushes against you. And then finally, to farmer, poet, philosopher Wendell Berry's use of one of the great vanishing words in our vocabulary, usufruct, which is the right of temporary possession, the use or enjoyment of the advantages of property belonging to another, and you can decide who that other is, so far as may be had without causing damage or prejudice to this. Wendell Berry wrote this in his essay, God and Country. Man has too long forgotten that the earth was given to him for usufruct alone, not for consumption, still less for profligate waste. So Eric Sloan closes this chapter with these words that I take as a prayer. God grant that the spirit of gratefulness again become a national trait. That in between, and this, remember, this was written in 1976, that in between year-long demonstrations of unrest and complaint, we might be treated to occasional demonstrations of thankfulness. Thank you.